evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us this evening and for what is our fourth in our menopause series of Restless Presents with our partners, My Menopause Centre. And on this occasion, we are looking at menopause in the workplace. Before I hand back over to Helen, who will chair this evening's event, I wanted to remind you of a couple of housekeeping points. So please post your questions and thoughts in the chat function at the bottom of your screens, and feel free to post throughout the presentation. There will also be time for questions at the end. This event is recorded and will be mailed to all who registered for this evening, along with links to any other resources, and it will be available to view on our YouTube channel as well, and within the menopause section of Restless. So I'd like to hand over now to our panel chair, Helen Normoyle, who is co-founder of My Menopause Centre. Helen has held Chief Marketing Officer roles across the healthcare, beauty, broadcast, furniture and property sectors, and is a self-described women's wellness champion. Over to you, Helen.
Aideen, thanks so much and welcome everybody this evening. Now, as you'll have seen from our invitation for the event, a staggering 1 million women are poised to quit their jobs here in the UK. And this is following the 900,000 that are estimated to have left their jobs because of the lack of menopause support. And unbelievably, 63% of companies still don't have a menopause policy in place. There are so many consequences to this lack of support. We lose in the UK an estimated 14 million workdays every year due to menopause symptoms. And with the menopause mainly affecting those in their 40s and early 50s, too many women are leaving work and leaving work at the peak of their careers, or they're stepping back from promotion, or they're reducing their hours or going part-time, not because they want to, but because they feel they need to, because of their symptoms. And all of this combined is clearly exacerbating the gender pay gap, the pension pay gap. It's weakening gender diversity at all levels in the organization, and it's doing nothing to attract and retain talent. I saw a recent UCL survey that estimated that women lose around £10,000 to £20,000 in wages and pension contributions because of the impact of menopause. And this really needs to change. Now, when you look at all of that combined, it's really no wonder that menopause has fast become one of the most important and topical issues facing businesses today. There's growing recognition of the impact that it's having on talent retention and talent attraction and mental health. So this can no longer be ignored. It can no longer be not addressed or overlooked, and the taboo really needs to go. So Dr. Claire and I are really delighted to be joined this evening by two brilliant women and experts in their respective fields, Deborah Garlick and Kate Hesk. So you all know Dr. Claire. She is my very dear friend and co-founder of My Menopause Centre and clinical director of our online clinic and go-to person for all things menopause related. And we'll come back and we'll have lots more of that from Claire. But Claire is really passionate about educating, empowering and supporting all women through the stages of the menopause transition. Deborah is the CEO of Menopause in the Workplace, and she's the author of the book, Menopause, The Change for the Better. Her Menopause in the Workplace team support employers to achieve menopause-friendly accreditation via the independent panel. And there they provide members with workshops, resources and guidance to make it easy for employers. And I've seen firsthand the impact of the brilliant work that Deborah and her team have done and do. She's organised the UK's first Menopause in the Workplace conference over 5 years ago, and we'll come back to that in a moment, Deborah. And her team have supported thousands of employers since then, including many of the leading employers recognised for demonstrating best practice. So lots of good learnings to share this evening, Deborah. Kate Hesk is the co-founder, chief people officer and head of coaching at Cognomi. She's also the organisation's subject matter expert on mental fitness, that is psychological and emotional well-being. Now, Cognomi has this brilliant vision to bring mental fitness development to people wherever they are around the world through their 100 active coaches globally, working with organizations in the public, private and non-for-profit sectors. Kate and her team believe that the world is facing a mental fitness emergency. I think we see this day in, day out, and particularly the stresses of the last few years, and now COVID or the war in Ukraine on top of it, with everything that's going on. And they believe that through proactive coaching, we can create a shift to enable people to have more insight and to feel more empowered to make changes and to be able to lead a better life. And we know how important this is, Kate, to support women going through menopause. So I know lots of great, I think, thoughts and advice and insights from you on this over the course of the conversation. Now, as Aideen said, feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. We've had some questions that were submitted in advance, and we will work through those. We'll weave them in, and we'll pick up on any questions that you have as we go through the conversation this evening as well. So, Deborah, we'll kick off with a question for you. So, as I've mentioned, you've been involved in menopause workplace training and education for the last 5 to 6 years. And I'm pretty sure you were a lonely voice in that 5 to 6 years ago. So why do you think that menopause is now so topical, even compared to 2 to 3 years ago, given that it's something that women have always experienced?
It's a really good question, and you're right. If I go back sort of 6 years, the first time we organised a conference on menopause in the workplace, there wasn't a policy in the land. And we worked alongside the Government Equality Office, and there certainly wasn't any then. But 2018, we were up to 1 in 10, according to the CIPD, and 1 in 5 last October on World Menopause Day. And yeah, things are changing, and quite right. I love the quote from Anya Hindmarsh, actually, on International Women's Day, that said, that the challenge of our generation is that we're very often working as hard as our dads and still trying to do the same things that our mums did. And I think that's right. We are the first generation to experience menopause during our working lives. There is more menopausal women in work than ever before. The UK's population is ageing, and with that ageing, the talent pool is shrinking. So more of us need to stay at work because employers really, really want us. So there's lots of compelling reasons that I'm sure we'll discuss later. But I think the other thing for me is actually this is getting a lot more media attention, and quite right. It's great to see that celebrities come out and talk about it. But every time any of us on this call start talking about menopause, what we're actually doing is changing hearts and minds about this, because it really does need to change. We should probably have been doing this 20 years ago. And now we're catching up. We need to get to a place where every organisation needs to take menopause seriously.
Yeah, look, that's a great point, Deborah. And I think your point around this generation of women coming into their 40s and 50s are not going to stand for it, you know, and that really is forcing the change, and having more women in senior roles in many different organizations is really making the difference. And women like yourself striking out there to go out and make a difference obviously is transformational. So Dr. Clare, you've treated thousands of women through the menopause, many in work. What are the symptoms of menopause that you see that most impact women in the workplace?
Yeah, it's probably hard to answer what are the symptoms that don't have an impact, because the symptoms can be so wide ranging and impact in so many different ways depending on your job and working environment. I mean, if we sort of think really broadly, so the loss of estrogen, and I'm stressing that this is not a personal failing, can result in psychological symptoms that can have big impacts, such as anxiety, low mood, with impact of loss of confidence, loss of self-esteem. There are the cognitive symptoms due to loss of estrogen in your brain, so brain fog and feeling woolly-headed. We know that there's estrogen receptors in the word finding bit of your brain, so that can't find the word, memory issues, you know, all sort of feeding into that anxiety, which is so common anyway without those symptoms. Loss of sleep obviously impacts everything. And then the physical symptoms, so you know, yes, the hot flushes and people feeling really embarrassed sitting in a shirt that's suddenly become drenched, but also the aches and pains, particularly if you've got a physical job, you're working on a shop floor, on a factory floor. You know, it can be really tough if you're waking up with stiffness and with general aches and pains through your joints. So I would say the sort of whole gamut of symptoms can have an impact.
Yeah, no, that's great, Claire. And then we've had some questions come in advance around, is there an official list of symptoms and the different treatment options? And because we're focusing this evening on menopause in the workplace, but we've got lots of great resources. So Emma's going to put some of that information into the chat. She'll put links to those in the chat. So Claire obviously touched on some of the symptoms there. And there's a whole range of treatment options, and we've done other events on that. So Emma will put in links to those resources as well, different treatment options in HRT in particular. Now, Claire, we know from previous conversations that sometimes the psychological symptoms of menopause, and particularly around cognitive function, can really impact women in the workplace as well, and contribute to this loss of confidence and self-esteem. So Kate, maybe a question for you on that front. If you look at the impact of these symptoms on mood and cognitive function, in your experience, what advice would you give women who are experiencing them, and what role can mental fitness and coaching play in helping women to feel like themselves again?
Yeah, thank you. So Claire's pointed out some of the obvious symptoms beyond the physical symptoms, if you like, around self-esteem, confidence. I'd build into that, absolutely stress and anxiety, which Claire mentioned as well, but also motivation, positivity, optimism, and all of that will contribute to someone's ability to be their best at work, to do their job, to perform to the way that the organisation expects them to perform. So when we're talking about menopause in the workplace, it's really important to recognize that all of these symptoms will absolutely potentially impact somebody's ability to do the work they're employed to do. So the advice we would give is to create space to become aware of what's really going on, to pause for long enough, to reflect and notice, to tap into the resources that we're going to share as part of this, but to tap into an awareness in oneself of what's really going on for me, to recognize that my symptoms will be probably different to the next person's symptoms, and this is an individual perspective and something very personal to me. So accepting that and embracing that is important. But firstly, giving it space, and that might sound strange, but we've got to stop for long enough to notice what's really going on. Notice what we're thinking, notice how we're feeling, and then work with that. And I would recommend, and like to talk more about this as we go through the evening, but find someone to share your thinking and feeling with. And that's where, for us, mental fitness coaching comes in. Having identified, what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, I can talk that out with a thinking partner, a professional coach in this way, but also, a thinking partner as supporter in the work setting or outside, to be able to make sense of what's going on for me, and to be able to build the capacities, the agency, the capability to step more into perhaps courage. Some of the questions are about, how do I address the conversation that I need to have? So we need to find the courage, don't we? We need to manage our emotion to be able to step into that space positively. And we can do that by helping, by getting some help from somebody else who can help us with the thinking. So that would be my initial thought around that.
That's really helpful, Kate. So we know there are some very progressive employers out there that are offering coaching to women, and particularly women going through menopause, to help with issues around confidence. But to your point, if that's not something that your organization offers, or it's not something that you can afford, really the importance of finding somebody to talk to kind of share how you're feeling. So whether it's a good friend outside of work, or somebody that you trust in a work environment as well. And Deborah, I'm sure we'll come to that in a moment as well, when we look at best practice and some of the work that you've been doing on that front too. So if we think about the support that organizations can give people as they're going through menopause, I think we sometimes think of it in terms of carrots and sticks. So carrots being the very many positive, beneficial reasons for supporting women, both the women impacted in the organization and generally everyone in the organization, to raise awareness. And sticks being more around an organization's legal obligations. And by meeting them, an organization is just doing basically following the law, which is always good practice, kind of basic practice, I would say, not necessarily best practice, but important. And it's relevant, I think, to one of the questions that somebody's put in around, what about small private companies, male dominant workforces who just don't care and aren't interested and think it's just an old lady. So we're potentially more in stick territory on that front. Deborah, coming back to you, we've seen increased reporting of women taking their employer to a tribunal and winning. So very briefly, what have these organizations failed to do? How have they failed to follow the law? and how are women with menopause symptoms protected under the law as it stands today?
Okay, so yes, very much in stick territory with this one. And to be clear, I often see headlines that the number of menopause tribunals have, seismic shift, and that's true. It has significantly increased, but it's increased on a very, very small number. So a significant increase on a small number is still a small number, but nevertheless, we are seeing tribunals being one now that are related to menopause. Generally, under the Equality Act 2010, menopause can be brought under age, sex, and even disability discrimination. Now, menopause isn't a disability, is it, Dr. Claire? But the definition of disability under the Equality Act means that symptoms can be so debilitating and over such a long period of time that they can be classed as a disability under that particular act. I'm focusing on the Equality Act 2010. There are obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act too, but that's the one that the tribunals are being brought on. But very often I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg of the problem. It's not easy to get to a tribunal, actually, and so many people stop with whether it's they've run out of steam themselves and thought, you know what, it's not worth it, or whether actually we know that some employers have settled on the steps rather than risk the reputational damage around a tribunal. But when I say the tip of the iceberg, I often encourage people to think about the employment relations issues that you'll have in your organisation. It's not just those tribunals, it's how many people are not being at their best, or have got problems at work, or whatever it might be. It's much broader than that. The only way to win at a tribunal actually is not find yourself there in the first place. So this is why some employers are taking action, because having a policy in place, training people up, engaging the workforce, and saying, actually, this is something that we all need to know about, educating. I love Kate's point, actually, come back to that one, but putting all of those things in place and looking at the facilities as well. Great organisations usually ask two questions of their employees, and that is, what can we do to help you be at your best at work, or what's getting in the way of you being at your best at work? Same sort of thing. And then listening and taking action, because it's very often not the things that employers think it is. So if you look at somebody like HSBC UK, it was very clear it was the uniforms, nylon fabric, making people sweat, very tightly cut, made for somebody that was, very premenopausal. So they actually just changed them. Or flexible working. So asking those sorts of questions. To be honest, most reasonable adjustments are very, very cheap things. I'll give you another example. A woman was, the feedback came through, I just want a fan. I get a bit hot. Why do I have to get everybody to sign it off to get one? And that particular organisation just added fans to the stationery order, and it just took that away completely. So they're usually small things, usually over a short period of time, usually cheap things, but can make a world of difference. And for so many, just being able to talk about it without feeling embarrassed, or as Kate was saying, find somebody in your organisation so you know you're not on your own and you've got a listening ear. And I'll probably add to that, champions. More and more employers are now having champions. I know HSBC have got 50 in their organisation, RSA, an insurance organisation, have, Santander have the same. So if you don't feel comfortable talking to your line manager or HR, you've got a listening ear there. And very much like you might have a mental health first aider for that matter. So they're the key things that employers are doing. And it does make a significant difference in that organisation.
Yes, Deborah, I think you've touched on a huge number of things there that touch on what best practice looks like and the things that women need. I wonder, before we come to drill down on that, Claire, I wonder if it's just helpful to just kind of frame the menopause, because I think people are often surprised at what age perimenopause can start at, how many symptoms and how long symptoms can last. So maybe a quick 101 on the key things about the menopause, so that everybody on tonight's session is clear on just how it can impact women and over what duration, and how it can therefore impact their career over multiple years.
Yes, yeah, no. I think it would be good just to take a step back and think about what are we talking about. So the perimenopause is really the start of the menopause transition, where your ovaries aren't reliably making the estrogen in the rhythmical, predictable way that it has done basically from puberty. And the perimenopause can really start in your early to mid 40s, really quite a common age. So women will often not recognize that the symptoms that they're experiencing are related to the menopause. They'll say to me that they just think that they're not coping with stress. Suddenly they're just hit with anxiety and sort of starting to look for reasons for that. And then those symptoms all feed further into the anxiety. If you're worrying about symptoms, it just makes it all worse. So perimenopause can last up to 10 years, but frequently less, on average 5 years, up to 10 years. And then the menopause is defined as 1 year of no periods. So that's when your ovaries stop making the estrogen altogether. The estrogen level stays low rather than fluctuating wildly. And then that's really then into your postmenopausal life, which, as we know, if women's life expectancy is up to the age of late 80s, can be up to 40% of the rest of your whole lifespan. So it's really important we understand this and get this right. And I think the reason it's so important to talk about it in the context of the workplace is because those changes that Kate and Deborah have been describing can really change women's experience of the menopause. I know I'm talking a lot about anxiety, but I hear about it such a lot in the clinic. Anxiety, loss of sleep, loss of self-confidence, loss of motivation, as Kate called out. And if you can get it right in the workplace environment, we spend so many hours of the day at work, you can really alter symptoms. You take away the anxiety, you can diminish some of the physical symptoms, you can diminish the hot sweats. So it's really important that we are the environments are supportive, women are allowed to talk, because it will really alter the intensity of symptoms and women's experience as they go through.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Claire. And I think one of the questions that's just come in, and I'll bring it in here now, is that clearly the benefit of having menopause champions or people talking about this as work is that you can share tips and advice. So a great question in here from someone who has brain fog, memory and concentration issues. So tips on how to deal with that. So Kate, if I start with you, any tips on if that's a challenge that you have? Any tips that you might have on that front? And then I'll come to Claire and Deborah on that, and then we'll go on to examples of best practice.
Yeah, thank you. And reading the other questions that are associated with that sense of where is this coming from, I think is the question to ask ourselves first. So absolutely maybe the menopause, and very possibly is menopause. And the work that we're doing, broadly speaking, over the world right now, recognizes that lots of people are stressed, lots of people are anxious. There's a lot of lack of confidence and optimism because of what's going on in the world, the pandemic, and now the situation in Ukraine. So there are lots of things that might be impacting it. So my initial recommendation, again, would be to pause and reflect and notice, acknowledge, and recognize that this is happening. So pause for long enough to know that this is something I'm experiencing. And maybe I don't need to interpret it or analyze it or work out why just now. For a while, I can recognize that it's happening, and then I can work out where I need to go to get the support to work with it. And, enabling our brain to work at its best requires us to stop panicking, to stop generating adrenaline, to be able to, use the prefrontal cortex to think proactively and productively. So we need to manage our emotion in order to do that, and manage our system in order to do that. So pausing for long enough to calm our system down, to notice what it is that's going on, and then looking for the support to work with it.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think from my own experience, very practically, using electronic devices or pens and paper, just post-its, making lists, I religiously take notes at every meeting, because I found going into my mid to late 40s, I just couldn't retain information in the same way I used to. So I think finding those adjustments, finding those things that work for you, but sharing your learnings and your experience with others can really help. And I know, Claire, you and the other doctors at the clinic take a very holistic approach to menopause care. And a lot of times, you know, when you see your patients, they need to kind of get a level of stability. We're getting lots of questions in here around HRT, alternatives to HRT. Can you maybe just give a quick overview of the different treatment options that can, by doing those, it gives you the foundation? Kate just touched on some of the coaching, and then Deborah, I'll come to you about best practice and where we're seeing it, and how smaller organizations, not just blue chips, can make progress in this one. But Claire, just kind of what are the foundational things that you would recommend that women think about as they look at treatment? Claire, I think are you on mute?
Thank you. Brain fog. So it really is not one size fits all, and there will be different aspects that you can pull out. I really like what Kate said, you know, taking time. So if that's lifestyle changes, to build more time into your lifestyle, if it's exercise, if it's yoga, whatever it is for you, to just have time to just calm your frazzled mind sometimes. And we know that that can decrease the intensity of hot flushes. Cognitive behavioral therapy can decrease the intensity of hot flushes and help you deal with the psychological and other cognitive symptoms of the menopause. There are alternative therapies that some people will find helpful, you know, whatever sort of captures your imagination, whether it's Reiki or reflexology, you know, some people will find that helpful. Acupuncture. For some herbal remedies, just slight word of warning, herbal remedies are still pharmacologically active. So you just need to make sure that they're not going to interfere with pre-existing health issues or medicines that you're taking. There's medicine that your GP or menopause specialist can prescribe that isn't HRT, that can definitely take the edge and help some symptoms if you don't want to take HRT, or you've been advised that HRT is too risky for you. And then there's HRT, which, you know, it is the most effective way of managing menopause symptoms. You often don't get hormone replacement therapy prescriptions right first time. You know, it can be a bit of back and forth and tweaking and finding the right combination of hormones. But if you can find the right HRT for you, it can make the world of difference as well. But I would really stress, often you need something else as well. The HRT is brilliant. But, you know, working with somebody like Kate, talking to somebody like Deborah, you know, often you need that, the sort of talking as well as the hormones to get you back on track, I would say.
Yeah. Brilliant, Claire. So that's really helpful just in terms of getting a foundation. Now, some excellent questions coming in around, so what can organizations do? What should they be doing? So Deborah, you touched on a whole range of things there, from education to training to workplace adjustments. If we kind of break it down and think about, if you're saying, what would the top 3 to 4 things be? And then I'm anticipating education will be one of them. Let's go back to education and what that entails. But top of mind, what are the key 3 to 4 things that organizations should look at doing?
Well, first of all organizations are very, very different. I saw the note about HSBC being a large organization, but we also see organizations with a small number of people. And they're all different from a cultural leadership, what they've already got in place, what they might have access to support an individual. But the same key elements are true. So that, you know, whether it's making it clear that your organization treats menopause in the workplace seriously. And for some organizations, that's a menopause policy. For other organizations, it's a guidance document. And, you know, if I think of other organizations, they just bring a collection of information together and have menopause hubs and menopause support groups backed by senior leaders and giving them access to that. So that's demonstrating that you take this seriously. The other one is the culture, the communication and engagement around this. I mean, it was great listening to that conversation about brain fog, because that is probably one of the number one ones in research, time and time again, that comes up top. You know, all of the education and the communications helping people understand that perimenopause is the most mysterious phase of them all. You don't know it's there, possibly. But you might be experiencing brain fog. So getting the communications going so that menopause isn't something that people feel embarrassed about. Now, obviously, we can say, let's talk about menopause, because that's what we do every day. But, I'm also appreciating that for so many people, this isn't an easy conversation to have. Menopause is something that might actually flinch when they start getting used to saying the word. They might feel embarrassed about it. They might not think they know enough about it. So they might think that they might offend somebody, or even culturally in some cultures. And I know we work with organizations and sort of do menopause training in Urdu because people find it more comfortable to listen to it in their own language. So that whole communication raft and getting to a stage where, I think it was Sadiq Khan last week that said, menopause conversations in the workplace are just normal. It's going to take time. It's not a one-hit campaign. It takes a while for people to get used to it. So organizations are doing great work in making it a normal conversation. The education is key, the training, because line managers, from the years of experience training line managers, do you know what? They can feel really worried about somebody having a conversation with them about menopause. They don't get menopause education outside of the workplace. And they don't know what they don't know. So actually educating line managers so that if a colleague is struggling, they know how to open up the conversation, what workplace adjustments might help, and what menopause is and isn't. So that's key. Same with HR and occupational health, but the training for everyone, because to be fair, we're all here because menopause isn't talked about enough. We're not necessarily taught it by our mothers. We're now being taught about it in schools, but getting that education out there so everybody knows what perimenopause is. If we do our job right, our daughters and sons coming through will just go, of course I know all about menopause. Why are you telling me about it? So that whole training is key. And I'd probably add to that your EAP provider, your employee assistance provider. It'd be fantastic if they all had access to Kate. But many EAP providers do provide coaching, do provide CBT, but so many of them have never trained their counsellors on menopause. So that whole raft. And I know I've talked about facilities before, but that's also very, very important because, access to cool air, access to uniforms, access to a desk fan, flexible working hours if possible, all of those are absolutely key in this campaign. Any others? I think I made that 4. So I think I'll stick with the 4 on those. They're the key elements all employers need to focus on.
Yeah, I think that's really, I think what it shows, Deborah, is just how it's something that everyone in the organization needs to engage with. And I think that was one of the very clear messages that Sadiq Khan put out. I think when he announced the new menopause policy that he was launching at City Hall, one of the things that really struck me was the focus he had on culture. And, saying that all staff are responsible for having a general awareness of menopause issues. And this for me is key because I think part of the challenge in the workforce is that menopause is wrapped up with ageism in the workforce, to challenge inappropriate behavior or derogatory remarks about menopause, because very often it's kind of seen as, older women being doddery and incompetent and kind of emotional about things. And that really just reinforces and perpetuates the stigma and the taboos around it. So I guess one of the key things I think we see in best practice is it really is leadership from the top of an organization, and it is toned from the top and people really leaning in. And I suppose to really make sure that it's not enough really is it just have a menopause policy. It's about bringing it to life and implementing it. And living it day in, day out. It's not a twice a year activity around International Women's Day and Menopause Awareness Month.
No, and the mission that we tend to do, or what we look for, is the question that we ask of an employer when they're doing this activity is, how has the lived experience around menopause, or for somebody experiencing menopause, changed in this organisation? And I know big organisations like Boots and HSBC, they've got a lot of parts of the organisation to shine a torch on when they're putting their campaigns together. But if I think of some of the smaller organisations, and I'm going to name a couple, actually the football clubs are getting on board with this. Huddersfield Town Football Club shared their plan with me the other day. Now there's something like 137 of them in that organisation. So you could pretty much bring them all into one room and do a lot of education. But again, they did the whole lots of posters around the place, few training sessions, getting everybody talking about it. Their senior leaders were talking about it. They put a policy in place. So very much the same sort of roadmap, if you like, but on a much smaller scale. And I think they probably have succeeded in changing the lived experience faster than some of those big organisations. So some small organisations can actually have a benefit.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a matter of spending a load of time and money. It's about getting on and having the conversation and creating, I think, that psychological safe space for people. We're getting lots of comments and questions around how do we bring men into the conversation. And I would add to that younger women too, because I think a lot of women under 40 don't have menopause on their radar. They're in danger of falling into it, probably like many of us have, and being completely unprepared, but also maybe lacking in understanding or in empathy for their female colleagues who are going through it and thinking that they're not going to be like that, or it's not going to be relevant to them in the same way. So I'll open up this question to all of you. What advice would you give around the best way to get men engaged in this conversation and younger women?
So I've seen global organizations, and I really get the point that somebody's made, that it's great to talk about blue chip, but let's also think about small organizations. But I'm going to start with the global. We've worked with global organizations where men on the board have acknowledged that they would like to be able to support not only women in their organizations, but their own female partner at home by understanding more about menopause. So where people are prepared to step up to that and to take that into policy and into an organization, into the strategy, is fantastic. And I think where that isn't happening is very often because of fear. And men or anyone in an organization where there's stigma attached to anything, including menopause, are often scared of what's going to happen if they, open up the lid and have a look underneath and work out what's going on and how to support people. So I think fear is often at the heart of it. So doing whatever we can to help continue to break the stigma and through influence as much as conversation, I think will help get beyond that. But we are starting to see that happen because the stigma is breaking, and this is of course part of that, and everything that's happening systemically is part of that as well. But that's what we've got to get to, and to engage people to understand that they don't need to be fearful. So we've got to approach it confidently as well, and not create a fear reaction from people, I would say.
Yeah, I've been really struck by the workshops and talks we've given to different companies, and particularly when there've been men on the board. And, we've gone physically into factories and we've given talks to the likes of brain's gone blank, Boots, and the sort of bigger companies. And I think at every level it's been opening the conversation. Would you agree, Helen? It's been educating. It's just sort of removing, it's almost, it is demystifying it, isn't it? It's not this funny thing that's happening, that this is the reason, this is what's going on physiologically and biologically, this is why there are symptoms, and this is what we can do about it. It really is taking the lid off and demystifying the whole thing so people feel more comfortable, I think, talking about it. I've been struck by the reactions that we've had, actually, opening that conversation. Deborah, how about your perspective?
I would say don't make assumptions that men aren't interested, because that does lead to the fear. And yes, they are interested. And if I think of the very first organisation, which is Severn Trent, I can share this because they did go public. The HR director, female, came to the very first conference, and she said to me at the end, "How do I get them talking about menopause? All the men on the board are male." And here I am, a woman of a certain age, going and talking to them about menopause and saying this is something we're going to need to take seriously. They're going to expect that from me. So we had a conversation about how she did it, and she said, I put my hands on the table and I said, I went to a menopause conference last week. And she said, around the room, all of the men said, "Can you get me some information? My wife's got that." And those particular board members they weren't on the front row. They were on the second row at the very first, and they sent notes round to the men in their organisation to say, "I'll be there. I expect you to be too." So, you know, that was not making assumptions around them being interested. They really are. And they also make great allies because, you know, I can think of several organisations that have male menopause champions. And the thing that's great about them, and I'm thinking here of Elliot Foster at Nottingham University Hospitals, in his 30s, male, and he said, I get stopped in the corridor mostly by men. And he started running men-only sessions because that was their safe space to say, I think my wife's experiencing this, or I think so-and-so's experiencing this. How can I help? So the more you involve them in it, and the more you tailor your engagement campaigns to not the message of this affects half of us in the population, it affects all of us, half of us firsthand, the rest through our relationships. And as soon as you start on that messaging, then actually that does change the outcome. So yeah, I'd go with don't make assumptions that they are really interested.
I think that's right, Deborah. And, you know, Lucinda's made a great point here. Most men want to help, most don't want to get it wrong, which was like sometimes they don't ask. But I think the points that you were all making, which is demystifying it, takes the fear out of it. And by having a demystifying session with everyone in the organization, there's a level playing field in understanding and language. So, and that creates a shared space for people, I think, to come together and to have the conversations. And, you know, there's several comments in here about being in smaller organizations with less resources. There are lots of great free resources out there that you can use. So there's our website, there's what Deborah has on her website, there's Kate's area, there's the Chartered Institute for Personal Development. And we'll send those links out so that you can find those free resources that you can use to create your own deck and your own kind of session, so that you don't feel, you know, the support is there, and we can help you find it. So that if you are in a smaller organization and you are on tight budgets, there's still a lot that you can do yourself, but not assuming anything is key. Now, I'm going to present a counterpoint. When we posted about this on social media last week, Dr. Claire took part in a panel which included Caroline Noakes, who's the brilliant chair of the Women and Equalities Committee. And she, you know, said that every organization should have a menopause policy. And we had some people disagree with that view. And I'll quote here, because I think it's a good challenge, and I can really understand where this person is coming from. As a woman, I find this utterly ridiculous. So employers should have a menopause policy. It's already hard enough for women in that age bracket to find work. You'll end up making things worse for them. So just your thoughts on that, and just really, I suppose, reinforcing how clearly that it's a tough situation that woman is in. But what are your thoughts and reflections on that? And how can a menopause, to really nail it, what impact is a menopause, the positive benefits of having a menopause policy? So who'd like to take that first?
I'll go with that one, because I do get this. You know, we fight for equality, and it takes a while to climb your way up the greasy pole. And then suddenly, this was actually something somebody said to me the first time I went into a police force. This is 2016, 2017. And actually, I got a message saying, can you not talk about that here? Because I don't want to show any weakness. I wear the same trousers as the men. I do the same job. And I don't want them to look at me in a different way. And so you can really understand where that sort of feeling comes from. But actually, that same workforce, that same police force were the first to publish a policy. And actually, the more and more they got people on board with it, the men weren't seeing it as a weakness. They were asking for information. And so I was actually thinking, after a time, once it's embedded, once they'd sort of took a deep breath and did it actually leveled the playing field. Because what the figures you quoted at the beginning, Helen, 1 in 4 women consider leaving work during their menopause. That's tragic. So actually, if we help people through that menopause, it could be at work for another 25 years. Leveling the playing field can extend your opportunity to go further up the career path and stay at work for longer. So I think it's worth the initial ouch, is this going to be okay? But also, to Kate's point, we work with international organisations, and it's now sort of getting to the stage where we're having the conversations with those organisations and getting that feedback so much more that I appreciate now how much we've moved in the UK. That feels to me like progress. 5 years on, we don't hear quite as much as that, but certainly in the US and Canada, for example, we do hear that a lot more. So I'm at the point of, that's a point of the journey. Once we all get past the point of menopause being a mystery and being something that somebody could hit us with, then, you know, it's a very, very different place to be working from.
And there's a point in the chat about, and you touched on it there, Deborah, that you know, at one time there weren't any maternity policies.
Yeah.
And now, you know, we're seeing a move towards menopause policies. We're seeing a move towards more and more mental health policies. So this is all about demystifying and breaking stigmas, and putting focus where it needs to be to support people to give their best at work. So the more that a policy is put in place, it creates the focus for people to have conversation, as we've said, and to know what's possible and how they can be supported within an organisation.
And I would second that, Kate, that if you don't talk about it, if it isn't brought up, if you do hide it away, you don't learn about the positives. You know, that the focus has to be on what can you do. This is going to happen. It happens to all of us. And many women will sail through, some people won't sail through. And so what are the positives that we can take from this? Well, if we don't open it up, you know, if we do hide it away, how do you find help? How do you get better? You know, I hit every single clinic. There'd be somebody who's stepped down from a role, who hasn't gone for a promotion, who's off sick from their job, you know, all of those difficult to measure things that ways that the menopause can affect women. And that, so yes, I would challenge that view that it doesn't have to be another stick that they beat us with. You know, you have to look at the positives. You have to open it up to see those positives.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the key things again that's coming out of this is not assuming. So we know that we can't assume that my experience of the menopause is different to yours. So every woman's experience is different. But I suppose it's also recognizing and looking at and having the insight that not all women will welcome this conversation in the workplace, and it's about meeting people where they're at and understanding how to engage and have a constructive. So it's not a battle, but it's a conversation around how this will help and how we meet people where they're at and how we move it along. So all people really, I suppose, but really great tips and great insights there, I think. Couple of last things as we move into the last 5-10 minutes of the session. With the focus on this and, you know, with the focus on having a menopause policy, what should organizations be looking at in terms of impact? What metrics? Because you know that saying, what gets measured gets managed. So how do we make sure that we're not box ticking by, you know, because in some ways, doing the menopause policy is the easy, but there's, as I say, some brilliant tools out there that give the advice. How will we know 1 year from now, 5 years from now, how will we know we've shifted the dial and we're making the change, we're seeing the change that we're leading for?
I know what the independent panel of Menopause Friendly look for, because you're right, actually, a menopause policy in an organisation that sits entirely in a filing cabinet is not really that much good to anybody, is it? You know, if it's just gathering dust and it's not in use, it makes no difference at all. So when I say that they look for how has the lived experience changed, now obviously organisations all do those great place to work surveys and regular things. So, you know, has anything on there changed? One thing that I thought was really cute from one of the organisations is they insisted on adding menopause to their absence and sickness. And I say insisted because they'd not really started on their journey to raise awareness or put training in place, but they thought we add it to the absence, reasons for absence. We will know if we are getting through, if people are brave enough to tick that box, or if line managers understand what to do if somebody ticks that box and have a conversation. So that was a great metrics. How many those organisations that introduce new uniforms, how many people order them or order desk fans? Has that changed? Has anybody asked for workplace adjustments, citing that their menopause is there? And when it comes to communication and engagement, we often ask for how many people are clicking on those? How many people attended that webinar? How many people gave feedback? What was the feedback that they gave you? Because that's really valuable. Because very often, if you finish the webinar on what else can we do to help you, and then change it and then tell them that you've changed it, that's actually a really great engagement mechanism to use. So just some off the top of my head there. But it does need to be measured in that sort of way. You can't just tick the box and say we've done it. You actually want to make sure it's getting through and changing the lived experience.
Yeah, they're great tips, Deborah. Kate, Claire?
And some of the things that will contribute to the lived experience and some of the aspects that we've touched on already around kind of psychological aspects, how motivated people are, how confident they are, how stress and anxiety are. And organizations are increasingly tracking those over time. So the work that we do around mental fitness, people benchmark, track, check over time how people are within the organization around aspects such as those, sleep, confidence as examples. And of course, you'd need to associate that specifically with menopause to know if the impact was there. But through data, through surveys, that's very possible. And the other big piece that's out there right now is a huge message around what everybody's calling the Great Resignation. So lots of people are voting with their feet and leaving organizations for all sorts of reasons right now. And to your point, Helen, about the data and how many people are stepping out of roles, that this menopause will be a contributing factor to that, as will lots of other reasons to do with COVID. But, retention metrics that organizations can look at, what's happening around attrition and retention and through exit surveys. Why have people left? Being brave enough to include that in the exit surveys, exit interviews, what was the impact? And if menopause starts to, or the way it was or wasn't supported starts to come up, that's really important for organizations to know, I would say.
It's a good one as well. Are people asking for workplace adjustments? That's key, because that shows confidence to be able to ask. And also if they're given, you're looking at it on both ends. Also the support groups that are going on. Organizations measure how many people are actually joining the support groups, because that's encouraging everybody to talk about it. And if it's, X number of people and they know they've got X number of the people at this sort of age group, they know what the percentage is in there. So there's lots of different ways that you can actually track it.
And I think just looking at who's voting with their feet, as you said, Kate, the Great Resignation, if I just think how medicine's changed since I was a junior doctor, looking up with very few role models, particularly in surgical specialties, and just seeing how that is now changing, for women coming up, how many women are on the boards? I know these are the sort of really big overarching things, but how many women are occupying those senior positions? Where's the gender, where's the pay gap? Is there a pension gap still? That I know that's ultimately the bigger picture, but for women looking up, are those role models there?
I think that's a brilliant point, Claire. And there's the ESG agenda is getting a lot more focus, so environment, social and governance. So a lot of places, a lot of organizations are now publishing the gender makeup of their organization by grade, and that's hugely important, because as the progressive organizations are setting clear targets for themselves about where they expect to be in terms of gender parity, by grade. And that will drive the closing of the gender pay gap, because the gender pay gap isn't really there for people in their 20s and 30s. Where you really start to see it to grow is for women and men in their 40s and 50s. And clearly menopause will be a key contributing factor to that. So last point before we close. So in the event that I mentioned earlier on that Dr. Claire spoke at, Caroline Noakes also said, I'd be astonished, given the evidence we've had. This is for the Women's and Equality Committee call for evidence on menopause in the workplace. If we didn't include in that recommendation that the menopause be made a protected characteristic. So, Deborah, quick question for you. Very practically, what would that mean for all employers, big and small?
It would make a lot of difference, actually. My personal preference is that menopause is the 10th protected characteristic rather than policies being made law, to be honest, because I think it gives a very, very clear message to organisations, to individuals, and also in the worst case situation for tribunal judges. Because at the moment they look at a case and go, is this sex, is this age, is this a disability? Whereas if it's menopause, I think they're much more likely to take it more seriously and, go on behalf of the woman if it's deserved, rather than going around the houses of, well, what is this anyway? So clarity for all, actually, on the 10th protected characteristic. I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah, I think we all will, but I think Caroline and her committee are a force of nature. So I'd be pretty confident. If I was a betting person, I know who I'd be betting on to get it through. And I think there's a massive groundswell of opinion. So we've had a brilliant comment, and a brilliant question here. Is there life after the menopause? And just a quickie of that, there absolutely is. You know, we live the rest of our life post-menopausal. Life expectancy is going up. It's 40% of our lives. Seize the moment. We're all of us here are passionate about raising awareness so that women have a better experience of it. So on that, I'm going to come to each of you. Top tips for living your best menopausal life, whether at work or at home. Kate, I'll start with you.
Spend time to understand yourself, appreciate who you are as an individual and what it is that you want out of life. So get focused on your purpose and your meaning, and create space to give yourself the opportunity to live that life as you wish to live it.
Fantastic. Deborah?
I would say, yes, this is a new chapter of my life. Embrace it, and accept who you are. I mean, I don't think I'll ever be rid of my brain fog now. It's pretty much legendary. I think I deserve a t-shirt that says not a noun to my name. And I accept that I cannot remember. You know, I'm always doing spontaneous charades with my friends and family. That's just me. But you know what, there's lots of benefits as well. And I was reading up something, and perhaps Kate knows more about this, I'll ask you afterwards, that you might lose your nouns, but you actually do improve on some areas of cognitive function. And you know what, I'm happy in my skin. I'm okay. You know, this is the next half a century, and I hope it's as good as the first.
Brilliant. And that's fabulous, Deborah. Kate and Claire, I'll leave the last few words to you. Top tips?
Thanks. I mean, I think because I can't take my doctor hat off, I would say it's really understanding what's going on. You know, you are not going crazy unless you want to be. You know, you have not got early dementia. You are not coping because you're a weaker person. You know, these are physical changes, but there are lots of things that you can do to work around them, to help them. And so just understand what's going on in your body, understand the options for feeling better. And yeah, don't look at the menopause as a personal failing, I think would be my top tip.
Yeah, brilliant, and brilliant doctor tips there as well, Claire. So I think you've heard it from everyone. What's really come through is knowledge really is power. And by informing yourself about what the menopause is, the symptoms, the treatment options, what your rights are, what best practice looks like in organizations. We did some research last year, not that you should need research to know this, but the more prepared women are for the menopause, the better their experiences. You know, we are the generation that will kick ass in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and beyond. And we have some brilliant women, you know, many brilliant women who've gone ahead of us. We owe it to the women who are struggling at the moment to be there, to be their voices, to be the hands that are pulling them up. So I just think the world will be a better place by women of all ages in all generations fully participating and engaging in life. That's why these sessions are so important. You know, clearly it's very clear from the questions that some people are in a really tough place at the moment. So I hope you felt the love a bit tonight of the sisterhood coming together to support each other in this. There is a whole range of brilliant free resources out there. You're not alone. You're really not alone. I suppose that's the key thing. talk to somebody. You don't assume that people won't want to hear your story, and don't assume that your boss, male or female, won't want to hear your story too. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm now going to hand back to Aideen to close tonight's session.
Amazing advice, and thanks so much for just such an amazing session tonight. It feels like there's so much more we could cover here too. So just once again, a reminder that we did record the event this evening, and a link will be mailed to all who registered, and also links to all the other resources that were shared on the chat function as well. It will also be available to view on the Restless YouTube channel, as well as within our menopause session of the site. If you haven't seen our previous menopause events, you can find them here too. So that's it. Thank you all so much to our partners, My Menopause Centre. Thank you so much to the amazing panel, and of course to all of our members, and to everyone else for joining, and for all the amazing questions and comments. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and good night.